Lyra stood in the great hall of her ancestral palace, her hands trembling slightly as the sunlight from the stained glass windows painted colors across the marble floor. Today was meant to be the day of her claiming, the day she would finally be joined to her fated mate, Kale, the kingdom's most honored beta warrior. From childhood, she had been told that fate had chosen them for each other, a bond meant to bring strength and honor to both their houses. The hall was filled with nobles, advisors, and knights. Everyone's eyes turned toward her as she stepped forward, her gown a soft silver that shimmered like moonlight. Her heart beat like a drum, a mix of excitement and fear. She had dreamed of this moment countless times, imagining Kale's hand on hers, his acceptance whispered in a tone that only she would hear. But when Kale entered, the world seemed to shatter. He walked with his usual quiet authority, the heavy cloak of his office brushing the floor. His eyes scanned the hall, then locked on her. For a moment, she saw nothing but the man she had longed for. Then his lips curved in a faint, cold smile, not one of warmth, but of judgment. "I cannot accept this bond," Kale said, his voice clear and loud, carrying to every corner of the hall. "She lacks the strength and spirit required of my mate. She is unfit." The words hit Lyra like a physical blow. Gasps rippled through the audience. Whispers erupted, sharp and cruel, spreading across the hall like wildfire. Her cheeks burned, tears threatening to spill, but she lifted her chin, forcing herself to remain composed. She had been prepared for trials, for challenges, but not for this public disgrace. Her mind spun. Unfit? Me? She had trained, studied, and devoted herself to the kingdom and to Kale. She had thought she was ready. And yet, here she was, humiliated in front of her family, her friends, and her peers. Her father, a stern man with a lined face, clenched his fists. Her mother's eyes glistened with worry. Even her younger brother's jaw tightened, anger and shame mirrored in his gaze. But none of their silent support could shield her from the sting of rejection. Lyra stepped back, bowing her head. Her voice, when she found it, was barely a whisper. I am sorry, my lord." She forced a curtsy and turned, fleeing the hall before she could crumble completely. The palace gardens were her refuge, a place where shadows and flowers intertwined, hiding her from prying eyes. She walked along the winding paths, the scent of night-blooming jasmine mixing with the cool evening air. She pressed her palms to her face, letting the tears fall freely now. "How could he?" she whispered to herself. "How could he judge me so quickly? Does he not see who I am?" Her anger rose alongside her sorrow. She had loved him, truly, and he had tossed her aside as though she were nothing. A part of her wanted to scream at him, to demand that he see her worth. But another part, the part that had been beaten down by fear and doubt, believed his words. Maybe she truly was unworthy. Lyra sank to the ground near the fountain, its waters reflecting the moonlight like shattered glass. She watched the ripples spread, imagining each one carrying away her dreams, her hopes, her place in the kingdom. She felt small, powerless, and alone. The bond she had believed in, the destiny she had cherished, now seemed like a cruel joke. She stayed there long into the night, listening to the rustle of leaves and the distant call of an owl. The world felt heavy, as though the air itself carried the weight of her humiliation. She thought of Kale's cold eyes, his words sharp and unforgiving. The rejection had been final, absolute, and yet she could not shake the ache of longing that lingered in her chest. As the first rays of dawn began to touch the sky, Lyra rose. She wiped her tears and straightened her gown, determined not to be broken entirely. She would not let the world see her despair again. Not yet. But inside, a storm raged, a mix of anger, sorrow, and the faintest spark of defiance. Her steps took her toward the outer gates of the palace, where she often wandered to escape the suffocating eyes of the court. She walked past the stone walls, past the towers that had once seemed so protective, and into the wildflower fields beyond. The wind carried her hair, tugging at her sleeves, whispering secrets she could almost understand. It was there, among the swaying blooms and silver morning light, that she sensed a presence unlike any she had known. Strong, commanding, and yet not cruel. Her heart skipped a beat, and she turned, scanning the horizon. A figure approached, mounted on a black stallion that seemed to drink the light around it. The man's armor gleamed faintly, etched with symbols of a kingdom she had only heard of in tales. His eyes, sharp and observing, met hers instantly. Even from a distance, she felt the pull of his presence, a magnetic force that made her pulse quicken and her breath catch. "You are Lyra of Eldoria." His voice was deep, resonant, and carried an authority that seemed to bend the world around him. Lyra nodded, unable to find words. She had heard stories of the Alpha King from the distant lands, the one who had conquered kingdoms with strength and wisdom, feared by enemies, revered by allies. She had never imagined she would meet him. And yet, here he was, his gaze fixed on her, as though he could see every hidden corner of her heart. "I have heard of your recent misfortune," he continued, his voice gentle but carrying weight. "It is rare to see one so young cast aside so publicly. But I believe the fault lies not with you, but with the eyes that cannot see your worth." Lyra's breath caught. No one had ever spoken to her this way. Not KL, not her family, not the court. His words were not pity, they were recognition. Understanding. Something in her chest stirred, a fragile spark of hope. I am not sure what you mean, my lord," she said cautiously, still unsure of what this encounter could mean. The Alpha King dismounted with fluid grace, his boots silent against the dew-damp grass. He approached, each step deliberate, and extended a gloved hand. "Come with me. There is more to your story than this palace has allowed you to show. You are stronger than they believe, and it is time someone sees it." Lyra hesitated, torn between fear and curiosity. She had been betrayed, humiliated, and left alone. And yet, something in his presence made her believe that perhaps, just perhaps, this was an opportunity to reclaim herself. With a deep breath, she placed her hand in his. His grip was firm, steady, and reassuring. As he led her toward his waiting horse, she felt a strange mixture of apprehension and anticipation. She did not yet know what the future held, but for the first time since Kale's rejection, she felt that fate might still hold a place for her. Behind them, the palace walls loomed, silent witnesses to her humiliation. Before her, the horizon stretched wide and unknown, promising adventure, challenge, and perhaps redemption. Her heart still ached from betrayal, but a new thread of possibility had woven itself through her soul. A thread tied not to the Beta, who had rejected her, but to the mysterious Alpha King who had appeared at the dawn of her despair. And so, with the first light of day shining across the wildflower fields, Lyra took her first steps toward a destiny that might be far greater than anything she had ever imagined. But as they rode, a shadow lingered in the palace halls. Kael, watching, his eyes dark with envy and fury. He would not accept this turn of events easily. And in the distance, the wind carried whispers of fate yet to be fulfilled, warning Lyra that the path ahead would be perilous, and the trials far from over. The grand hall of Eldoria buzzed with anticipation. Nobles whispered behind gilded fans, and knights shifted uneasily, sensing that something extraordinary was about to unfold. The news of the Alpha King's arrival had spread quickly. Darius of the distant northern lands, a ruler whose strength and wisdom were legendary, had come to the palace. Some whispered of his victories in wars long past, others of the magical aura he carried, said to make even the bravest hearts falter. Lyra stood quietly in the shadowed corner of the hall, her silver gown catching the flickering torchlight. She had returned to the palace after her night of despair, determined not to allow the court to see her vulnerability again. Her heart still throbbed from the memory of Cale's rejection, yet a faint thread of hope lingered from her encounter with Darius in the morning mist. She did not know whether she could trust the strange pull she felt toward the Alpha King, but there was something undeniably magnetic about him. The doors of the hall opened with a thunderous creak, and all eyes turned as Darius entered. He was taller than most men in the kingdom, his frame broad and commanding. Yet his movements carried a rare grace. His dark eyes swept the room, assessing, understanding, and finally resting on Lyra. The moment their gazes met, she felt a shiver run down her spine. It was as though he could see through the layers of fear, shame, and longing she had carried like a secret cloak. Darius moved forward, not with arrogance, but with a quiet authority that seemed to shift the energy of the entire room. The nobles stilled, some bowing instinctively, others daring only a cautious glance. Even Cale, standing near the throne with a group of warriors, could not hide the tension in his shoulders. "My lords and ladies of Eldoria," Darius's voice was deep and resonant, carrying easily across the hall. "I come not as a conqueror, but as a guest, seeking wisdom, alliance, and understanding of your realm." A murmur of approval and curiosity spread among the courtiers. Yet Lyra noticed that beneath the measured formality of his speech, there was something directed solely at her, a recognition. A subtle acknowledgement of the humiliation she had suffered. Cale's eyes narrowed as he caught her glance toward the Alpha King. He stepped forward slightly, his hand brushing the hilt of his sword, though the motion was more a show of dominance than actual intent to strike. "Your arrival is unexpected, Alpha King," Cale said, his voice smooth but edged with suspicion. "You enter a kingdom already in order. Do you intend to judge our ways?" Darius inclined his head slightly, a calm smile playing at the corners of his lips. "I judge nothing without understanding. And yet, I have heard whispers of a certain injustice within these walls. A noble woman cast aside, despite the courage and strength she carries. I seek to see truth, not rumor." Lyra felt her pulse quicken. The words pierced through the weight of shame she had carried since Cale's rejection. She wanted to speak, to protest, yet found herself rooted to the spot, both fearful and captivated by the man who seemed to speak directly to her heart. Darius took a slow step closer. The air between them seemed charged with an energy she had never known, a strange mix of calm power and quiet fire. "You, Lyra of Eldoria," he said, his voice softening, yet every word carried weight, "have been wronged. I wish to know the true measure of your spirit." The hall seemed to vanish around her. Whispers faded into silence. All that existed was the space between her and the Alpha King, and the strange pull that made her heart leap and her breath catch. Cale's expression darkened, his composure strained, as he realized that Darius's interest was not superficial, and that it cast his own rejection of Lyra in a harsher light than he intended. Lyra swallowed hard, trying to steady her voice. I am not sure what you mean, my lord. I have faced the judgment of my mate already." Darius's gaze softened, yet it carried the unyielding strength of someone who had faced countless battles, both on the field and within the heart. Judgment can be cruel when blinded by pride, fear, or ignorance. Strength is not only in muscle or sword, Lyra. It is in courage, in resilience, and in the fire of the spirit. "Show me this fire, if you dare." Lyra felt a warmth in her chest she had not known for days. The Alpha King was not mocking her. He saw her not the fragile, humiliated figure Cale had dismissed, but someone capable of growth, courage, and greatness. The fire he spoke of was something she had almost forgotten existed within her. Over the next days, Darius did not merely watch her. He tested her. Simple challenges at first. Walking through the palace corridors with a sense of authority, learning the strategies of council meetings, observing her decisions in small disputes among the servants. Each task was designed not to humiliate her, but to awaken her confidence, her intellect, and the quiet strength she had hidden for so long. Lyra found herself rising to the challenges, her steps surer, her gaze steadier. She began to see herself not as a victim of Cale's cruelty, but as a woman capable of commanding respect and attention in her own right. And always, there was Darius, calm and steady, observing without intrusion, his presence a constant, grounding force. Cale, however, could not remain idle. The beta had grown used to control, to influence, to being the center of power in Lyra's life. Darius's attention threatened that control, and Cale's jealousy simmered beneath his composed exterior. He watched Lyra closely, noting her small smiles, the spark of determination in her eyes, and the subtle shift in the court's perception. Anger and envy twisted within him, making him reckless in ways he would later regret. One evening, Darius took Lyra to the palace gardens. The sky was painted with the deep purples and golds of dusk, the air fragrant with jasmine and rose. Torches flickered along the paths, casting dancing shadows. Here, away from the scrutiny of the court, he began speaking to her more directly. "You carry the weight of disgrace like a chain," he said softly, "but chains are only as strong as the mind that fears them. Your strength, it has always been there. Cale did not see it, but I do." Lyra felt her throat tighten. No one had spoken to her this way without judgment, without pity. She wanted to trust him, to believe that the fire within her could burn bright again. And yet, fear lingered. Could she truly step into her own power after such rejection? Could she allow herself to feel hope again? Before she could answer, a sound from the palace startled them. Cale's voice, raised and commanding, cutting through the evening air. He had come to confront them, to assert control, to remind the world and Lyra that he still held power over her. Darius's hand brushed hers lightly, a gesture of reassurance and quiet dominance. "Fear him not," he said. "You are no longer bound by his judgment." Lyra drew a deep breath, feeling courage rise within her. With Darius by her side, she did not feel small or powerless. She felt seen, recognized, and perhaps ready to reclaim the part of herself that Cale had tried to destroy. As Cale approached, the tension in the garden was palpable. The wind carried the scent of roses and earth, and the shadows seemed to lean closer, as though eager for the coming confrontation. Lyra's heart pounded not with fear, but with anticipation. She did not yet know how this confrontation would end, but she felt, for the first time in days, that she had allies who would stand with her, and a strength she could call her own. Cale's eyes narrowed as he looked at Darius, and then at Lyra. "You dare stand beside him?" he said, his voice low, dangerous. "After all I have said?" Lyra lifted her chin, meeting his gaze. "I stand, not because I seek revenge, but because I choose to see my own worth," she said, her voice steady, despite the tremor in her chest. Darius's presence beside her was a shield, a quiet assurance that she did not need to face this alone. Cale's fury was evident, but the seed of doubt had been planted. The court had begun to watch, sensing the shifting tides of power and loyalty. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the garden in shades of purple and gold, Lyra felt something she had not felt in a long time. The stirring of hope, the spark of courage, and the faint, thrilling pull of a destiny that was no longer dictated by rejection or shame, but by choice, strength, and the presence of a man who recognized her true value. The first light of dawn touched the palace towers, casting a pale glow across the gardens where Lyra trained under Darius's watchful eye. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of morning dew and distant forests, and each step she took seemed to echo with the promise of transformation. Since the Alpha King had taken an interest in her, her life had shifted from despair to a quiet urgency, a need to prove herself not to Cale, not even to the court, but to herself. Darius stood nearby, tall and unwavering, his eyes tracing her movements with a mix of assessment and something deeper recognition. He did not interfere, but his presence was like gravity. It anchored her, pushed her, and challenged her to reach beyond the limitations Kael had imposed. "Your stance is too rigid," Darius said, his voice calm yet precise. "Strength is not merely force. It is control, patience, and awareness. Bend with the world. Do not resist it blindly." Lyra exhaled, forcing herself to relax her shoulders. She had always thought that power meant pushing forward with relentless force, as Kael often demonstrated, but Darius's method was different. It required thought, anticipation, and harmony with one's own spirit. Slowly, carefully, she adjusted her movements, feeling a subtle shift within herself, a whisper of power she had not known existed. "You are learning faster than most," Darius continued, his gaze softening. Lyra hesitated, unsure how to answer. I think you saw what Kael could not," she said quietly. "You saw me." Darius nodded. "Exactly. Strength and worth are not always visible to those blinded by pride or fear. They are visible to those willing to look beyond appearances." For the first time since Kael's rejection, Lyra felt something she had thought impossible, a sense of possibility. If she could master this strength, not for the court or for Kael, but for herself, perhaps she could step fully into who she was meant to be. Days turned into weeks. Lyra trained relentlessly with Darius, who guided her not just in physical skill, but in strategy, diplomacy, and even the subtle threads of magic that lingered in the palace. She discovered abilities she had never realized, an acute awareness of others' intentions, a sensitivity to subtle shifts in energy, and an inner courage that refused to be suppressed. With each challenge, Darius's respect for her grew, though he never allowed his admiration to become indulgent. His presence remained a balance of guidance and restraint, pushing her to reach beyond what she thought possible. And with each passing day, Lyra found herself drawn to him not merely in gratitude, but in a deeper, more dangerous fascination. It was during a late evening in the palace library that their connection deepened further. The room was quiet, lit only by the soft glow of candles. Rows of ancient tomes towered above them, and the scent of parchment and ink filled the air. Lyra had been reading a text on the lineage of Alpha Kings and the balance of power within kingdoms. Her brow furrowed in concentration. Darius approached silently, placing a hand lightly on the table beside her. "You underestimate your strength, your wisdom, and your resilience. These walls have confined you, but they have not defined you." Lyra's fingers froze on the page. I am afraid," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "Afraid that I will fail, that Kael was right about me, that I am not strong enough." Darius's gaze softened, yet it held the intensity of someone who had faced countless trials. Fear is natural. But courage is not the absence of fear, it is action despite it. You are far stronger than you believe. Something shifted in Lyra at that moment. The quiet certainty in his voice, the unwavering faith he seemed to have in her, ignited a fire within her chest. She realized that Kael's rejection had not defined her. It had merely awakened her potential. And in Darius's presence, she could see herself not as a fragile, humiliated noblewoman, but as someone capable of greatness, resilience, and even love. As the days passed, tension in the palace grew. Kael's jealousy simmered beneath the surface, manifesting in whispered threats and veiled insults. He could not understand why the Alpha King had taken an interest in Lyra, and the fact that she seemed to flourish under Darius's guidance stoked his fury further. One evening, Kael confronted Lyra in the palace corridors, his voice low and dangerous. "You think you are stronger now? You are nothing without me." Lyra lifted her chin, her voice steady and calm despite the flutter of nerves. I am stronger because I have chosen to be. You never gave me a chance, Kale. I do not need your approval. Kale's jaw tightened, and for a moment, it seemed he might strike. But Darius appeared silently at her side, a shadow of calm authority. His presence was enough to make Kale pause, realizing that Lyra was no longer alone, and that the balance of power had shifted. You will learn respect, Darius said, his voice firm but measured. And so will she. Kale's glare lingered, but he withdrew, his fury barely contained. Lyra felt a thrill of empowerment, a recognition that she could now face the beta who had once shattered her without fear. The next trial came unexpectedly. A rumor of rebellion in the northern forests reached the palace. Darius prepared to depart with a small contingent, and Lyra insisted on accompanying him. I must learn to protect not just myself, but others, she said. I cannot hide behind my past any longer. Darius studied her carefully, a faint smile playing on his lips. You are ready, he said simply. But remember, strength is tempered with wisdom. Impulsiveness can destroy more than any sword. In the forest, Lyra experienced her first real taste of danger. The air was thick with the scent of pine and wet earth, and shadows moved like whispers among the trees. When a group of insurgents ambushed them, she felt the adrenaline surge, her senses sharpening beyond anything she had known. Darius remained calm, directing her with precise commands, allowing her to act with confidence. When the battle ended, Lyra stood amidst the fallen branches and scattered leaves, her chest heaving, her heart pounding with exhilaration. She had fought alongside Darius, not beneath him, and had emerged victorious. In that moment, she understood that she had claimed her own strength. As night fell, they camped beneath a canopy of stars. The fire crackled between them, casting flickering shadows that danced across their faces. Lyra felt a quiet vulnerability, an urge to speak truths she had kept hidden. Darius, why do you see me differently? She asked, softly. He regarded her with a gaze that was both piercing and tender. Because you allow yourself to be seen. You are not afraid to confront fear, to embrace your power, and to seek truth. Most hide behind pride or despair. You do neither. Lyra's heart skipped a beat. The intensity of his attention, the depth of his understanding, made her pulse quicken. She had not realized how deeply she longed for recognition, not just for her skills, but for the person she was becoming. And Darius offered that, not as pity, but as admiration. Before she could respond, a shout echoed through the trees. Kael, driven by jealousy and rage, had tracked them, his eyes wild with fury. He stepped into the clearing, weapon drawn, intent on proving that Lyra was still beneath him. Darius's hand rested lightly on the hilt of his sword, calm and measured. Stand back, Lyra, he commanded. This is not your battle alone. But Lyra did not step back. She felt the surge of all she had learned, the discipline, the strategy, the strength Darius had awakened within her. This confrontation was not about Kael's dominance. It was about her own power, her own choice, her own destiny. The night air vibrated with tension as Lyra faced the man who had once rejected her. For the first time, she did not feel fear. She felt clarity, purpose, and the fierce thrill of a power she had claimed as her own. And in that moment, standing side by side with Darius, Lyra realized that the bond between them was no longer simply one of guidance. It was something deeper, unspoken yet undeniable. A connection forged through trust, challenge, and the awakening of hearts and spirits alike. The first rays of dawn touched the palace towers, casting long shadows across the marble floors of Eldoria. Lyra stood at the edge of the palace courtyard, her silver gown flowing like liquid moonlight, her chest rising and falling with measured breaths. She had faced rejection, humiliation, and doubt. Yet now she felt an unfamiliar certainty deep within her. Kale, the beta who had once rejected her, lingered near the palace gates, his dark eyes locked on her, brimming with fury and envy. Beside her, Darius, the Alpha King, moved with quiet authority, a calm presence that radiated strength. Together, they had trained, faced dangers, and discovered a bond that went far beyond appearances. But Kale's shadow still loomed, a reminder that the past could strike at any moment, testing the courage and resolve Lyra had built. "You are ready," Darius said softly, his voice steady yet imbued with warmth. "Remember, your strength is not only in skill or magic, but in choice. Stand firm in who you are." Lyra nodded, feeling the power of his words settle within her. She did not feel fear, not as she had before, but anticipation and clarity. She would face Kale, not for vengeance, but to reclaim what was always hers: her dignity, her power, and her destiny. Kale stepped forward, his hand on the hilt of his sword, though he did not strike immediately. "You dare face me after all I have said?" His voice was sharp, like the edge of a blade. "You are nothing without me." Lyra lifted her chin, her eyes meeting his without hesitation. "I am stronger, because I have chosen to be. I do not need your approval, nor your recognition. I am enough, as I am." Kale's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening as he realized that Lyra no longer trembled before him. The woman he had scorned, the one he had believed weak, now stood resolute and radiant, a force of her own making. Darius stepped beside her, his presence a shield of calm strength. "Kael," he said, his voice low but unwavering, "you will not define her worth. That choice belongs to her alone." Kale's fury blazed, yet Darius's gaze held him in check. For the first time, Lyra realized the depth of the bond between them. This was not merely protection, it was partnership, trust, and unspoken understanding. The Alpha King did not dominate her. He empowered her, and she, in turn, embraced her power fully, no longer hiding behind fear or doubt. Kale made a sudden move, lunging toward Lyra, but she reacted instinctively, her training and inner strength guiding her. She sidestepped with precision, her movements fluid, controlled, and deliberate. The palace courtyard became a stage for their silent confrontation. The tension between past and present, rejection and acceptance, swirling like the wind through the marble columns. "You think you can stand against me?" Kale spat, his voice strained with disbelief. "I do not stand against you," Lyra replied, her tone calm, unwavering. "I stand for myself. That is the difference." Darius's eyes gleamed with pride as Lyra moved with a confidence and grace she had never known. She no longer fought merely with skill, but with intention, awareness, and the subtle energy that Darius had awakened within her. Kale's strikes, once unchallenged, met resistance, not brute force alone, but the careful, precise control of someone who had discovered her true power. The duel continued, fierce yet controlled, until Kale stumbled, unprepared for the transformation he was witnessing. Lyra's eyes burned with determination, and she realized that this confrontation was not just physical. It was the culmination of every trial, every humiliation, every lesson she had learned. And then, Kale whispered something that made her falter for the briefest moment. A curse, spoken with the venom of old pride and anger. It was subtle, insidious, designed to sow doubt and fear, to weaken her newly found strength. Shadows swirled faintly around him, a hint of the magic he had tried to bind to her spirit. Darius moved swiftly, placing himself between them. His hand rested lightly on her shoulder, grounding her. "Do not fear it," he said. "You have grown beyond the reach of his shadow. Trust in yourself and in the bond we share." Lyra inhaled deeply, feeling the warmth of Darius's presence and the strength that now radiated from within. She closed her eyes for a heartbeat, centering herself. letting the lessons of weeks and months settle in her mind. She did not need to fear Kale's curse. Her own spirit was stronger than any magic cast in malice. When she opened her eyes, the world seemed sharper, brighter, as if clarity had settled over her. Kale's eyes widened, realizing that his attempt to intimidate her had failed. Lyra moved forward, not with anger, but with calm authority. She spoke, her voice carrying across the courtyard. "I am not yours to judge, Kale. You may have rejected me, but your words cannot bind me. I claim my strength. I claim my destiny, and I choose who stands beside me." Kale's shoulders slumped, a mixture of defeat and disbelief etched on his face. He had underestimated the fire within her, the power she had cultivated under Darius's guidance. And in that moment, he knew he could no longer control her, could no longer define her. Lyra turned to Darius, her gaze meeting his with a mixture of gratitude, admiration, and something deeper, a connection forged through trials, understanding, and the awakening of hearts. Darius inclined his head slightly, a silent acknowledgement of the journey they had shared. "Together," he said softly, "we are stronger than any shadow from the past." The palace courtyard, once a place of shame and humiliation for Lyra, now felt like a sanctuary of rebirth. The sun climbed higher, casting golden light across the marble, illuminating her as she stood tall, radiant, and unafraid. She had faced rejection, betrayal, and doubt, and emerged not broken, but whole. But even in the triumph, the world hinted at challenges yet to come. In the distance, the wind carried whispers of ancient forces, observers unseen, who had watched her journey with interest. Darius placed a hand on hers, a simple gesture that spoke volumes. They had faced the beta together, but destiny had not finished testing them. Greater trials lay ahead, not in the shadows of Kale's envy, but in the unknown paths that awaited beyond the palace walls. Lyra smiled faintly, a mixture of resolve and anticipation. For the first time, she understood the truth of Darius's words. Strength was not merely in muscle, magic, or status, but in choice, courage, and the willingness to embrace one's destiny fully. And she had made that choice. Kale, humiliated and defeated, withdrew silently, leaving the courtyard and the palace in a tense quiet. He had failed to break her spirit, to reclaim any claim over her destiny. Lyra watched him go, her heart free of the fear and longing that had once bound her. The beta who had rejected her was no longer a force she needed to reckon with. Darius and Lyra walked together toward the palace gates, their steps in harmony. The bond between them had deepened beyond words, forged in trials of strength, courage, and trust. Lyra no longer felt like a pawn in the hands of fate. She was a woman who had reclaimed her power, and who chose the path she would walk with Darius by her side, not as a master, but as a partner, a guide, and a kindred spirit. As they paused at the gates, Darius turned to her, his dark eyes searching hers. "The world beyond this palace is vast, filled with challenges we cannot yet see," he said. "But you, Lyra, have proven that your spirit is unbreakable. Whatever comes, we will face it together." Lyra nodded, feeling the full weight and promise of his words. "I am ready," she said simply. And for the first time in her life, she truly believed it. The palace behind them was no longer a place of shame or rejection. It was a reminder of the trials that had forged her strength and courage. The future stretched before her like a horizon bathed in gold, the unknown, the extraordinary, and the adventures yet to come. And yet, even in that golden light, a whisper of the past lingered. Shadows of ancient forces, unspoken prophecies, and distant lands called to them, hinting that their journey had only begun. The trials that had shaped her were but the first step on a path of destiny far greater than she could yet imagine. Lyra and Darius mounted their horses, side by side, their presence a testament to choice, courage, and love. The wind swept through the courtyard, carrying petals, sunlight, and the unspoken promise of adventure. They rode forward together, not bound by fate, but guided by their own courage, wisdom, and the unbreakable bond they had forged. And as the palace disappeared behind them, Lyra understood this truth fully. Rejection had not destroyed her. It had awakened her. The beta, who had scorned her, was a memory, a shadow of the past. The alpha king who had seen her potential was her present, her partner, and the herald of the extraordinary life she was ready to claim.